World of Warcraft. Released back in 2004, it was once, and still is, the biggest MMORPG ever released. Now over the years, World of Warcraft has definitely changed. Some might say for the better, whilst others might say for the worst. Modern WoW really tries to save you as much time as possible, with its primary focus being the fast-paced endgame content, which appeals to a few different types of people. Dinosaurs that don't have a lot of time anymore, and brain-rotted Gen Z losers such as myself. WoW Classic, on the other hand, really only appeals to one type of person, and that is of course the older generation of WoW players who are still trying to chase that nostalgia kick. And if you were to ask any of these Classic players which version of WoW is better, they will defend Classic WoW with their life. But is it actually a good game? Is it really worth the hype that the players give it? Well, as someone who has never played Classic WoW before, this is what I'm trying to find out. Before we get started, I would like to say that I am trying to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so any help is appreciated. It costs you nothing and it means the world to me. In case you haven't seen any of the previous videos, which I suggest you do, then I would like to introduce you to my character, Fartin Sniff. Last time I played WoW Classic, I had only just gotten familiar with the game and the very basics of how everything works, and decided that I would take on my first ever WoW Classic dungeon, and not only take it on, but tank it. Today we have only one goal, and that would be to take on my second ever Classic dungeon, and one of my favourite dungeons, the Stormwind Stockades. Starting the day off, we were in the Wetlands as a tiny little level 22, and in order for me to run the stockade, I would want to get to around level 26, which means we did have a bit of questing to do first. And what better way to start off than with Gnoll killing quest? Honestly, if I had a gold for every Gnoll I've killed so far, well then I'd have more than 4 gold. I spent probably around 3 to 4 hours in the Wetlands exploring Menethil and doing literally every single quest in the entire zone, such as murdering crocodiles and taking their skin, murdering raptors and taking their skin, murdering even more raptors and taking their skin, murdering murlocs and taking their... Once I had completed the Wetlands, I headed back into Stormwind so that I could list all of my garbage onto the auction house, and then headed back into Red Ridge Mountain so that I could finish off a couple of the higher level quests that I had ditched earlier. It was mainly collecting the quest items from the mini bosses that were placed around, like Yowler's Paw, which I got done very easily since there was a little gnome mage who was also waiting for someone to come and do the quest. I also needed to explore a cave and take out a load of orcs, and weirdly enough, I'm pretty sure the layout of this cave is identical to a cave that I explored in Dunmora, but maybe that's just me. And lastly, for Red Ridge, I had a couple of elite quests to get finished, so I joined up with a few players that were also there, and we got it done nice and easily. So I had finished Red Ridge Mountains and the Wetlands, so I wanted to find a new zone to quest in for a bit, and I had a couple of options. I could head over to Kalimdor and quest there for a while, but I wasn't really in the mood to get surrounded by hordes of troll mages, so I went with Duskwood, a very dark and gloomy place that is clearly going for a type of horror theme, but I kind of like it. I've never been here before. I may have briefly passed through it before, but never spent any sort of substantial time here, so I was quite excited to see what it was all about. Which also meant that there was an absolute boatload of quests to get done throughout the entire zone. Luckily, the mobs were a few levels under me, which meant that I could power through lots of quests at once, like fingering skeletons, killing spiders, killing ghouls and looting their fangs, killing wolves and taking their skin, and after a couple hours spent inside of Duskwood, mobs started to grey out, and that was because I had already reached level 26 and hadn't realised, which means it was time for the Stormwind Stockade. Excited to take on my second ever Classic dungeon, I rushed back to Stormwind and logged out for the night. I logged in the next day at a time any well-adjusted member of society would, just as eager as the night before to run some dungeons. One slight issue I had is that I had no idea where to get the quests from. So me and my friend Levy spent a solid 25 minutes trying to figure out where I had left the quest chain, only to find out that it was right in front of me the entire time. I also happened to have just learnt about the group finder feature, which happened to be hidden behind a million add-ons. So using that, I managed to find myself a group to run, and we got stuck right into it.
Masturbation, ejaculation, slinging lots of semen to the masses. Face to face and now we fornicating. Pussy only when I'm busting asses. Meat on his
So is that it? Is there more? Have we done everything? Yeah, so in case you couldn't tell from my reaction, I was in fact not impressed by this dungeon whatsoever. I mean, in retail, this dungeon is really cool. I mean, you've got the Lord Inferno guy and the other guy that teleports around the room and it's all cool and everything. But in Classic, the dungeon seems to be pull 16 rooms of identical mobs and then leave. I was expecting it to be at least somewhat similar to the Dead Mines, you know, couple of bosses, maybe get some nice loot upgrades, but nope, none of that. In fact, the footage was so boring that I had to turn it into a little edit, which I hope you enjoyed because the previous 10 segment took me an hour to find the audio for it. So coming out of the stockades, I did in fact notice that I missed 3 of the quests, which means I've got to go back into the dungeon and collect the quest items. Luckily for me though, I randomly got invited to a group that had a level 43 paladin that was boosting the other players, and I mean, I ain't gonna say no to that now, am I? So we hopped back in and I kind of just stood back and watched this dwarf pull like 4 of the rooms at once, and I did make sure this time to loot every single mob to ensure that I was actually going to be able to complete the quests this time. Let's go! We're gonna turn in all of these quests and never do that again.
What can I do for you? Be careful.
Huge. Bring the sealed description of Desert.
Go with honor.
Barros Alexton. So, I've now completed my 2nd ever dungeon in World of Warcraft Classic, and although it may have been the worst dungeon experience I've ever had, not just in World of Warcraft, but in any MMO I've ever played, am I still enjoying WoW Classic? Well, I would say yes. Although it wasn't fun, I do still enjoy the laid-back experience that WoW Classic offers. I enjoyed the first dungeon so much, and I know that the rest of the dungeons are going to be much better, but I do know that the next dungeon is going to be a blast, because it is Black Fathom Deeps. I hope you enjoyed this video, because I enjoyed making it. I always do. Remember, I am trying to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so any help truly is appreciated. And I know it is a slightly shorter video today, but I honestly wasn't expecting the dungeon to be so bad and boring, but whatever, we move on to the next. Anyway, enough yapping. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all later.